Now, NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio with Lee Witting, whether you're listening on TalkZone, by podcast, through the archives of our ad-free shows on our YouTube channel, or connected through the incredible content of our Facebook page. Many who return from near-death experiences find they have abilities they were never aware of before. Some of these include gifts of healing, reading others' thoughts, seeing auras, even prophetic visions, and they rightly attribute them to spiritual gifts, even though that latent ability might have lurked inside them since their birth. Our guest today, David Ditchfield, was plagued by dyslexia all his life. Disabled in his reading skills, he was teased and criticized by teachers and classmates all through school, leaving him with little self-respect, poor job prospects, and a serious drinking problem. What no one recognized in David is that dyslexia is often a sign of latent gifts beyond the sequential process of reading. Dyslexics are often highly intelligent and creative, gifted as visual, multidimensional thinkers. For example, some of the many dyslexic geniuses include Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, Leonardo da Vinci, Auguste Rodin, and Walt Disney. Today, David is an acclaimed artist and composer, but it took a dramatic accident and an NDE to turn his life around from its unpromising beginnings. In 2006, he was dragged under a speeding train in a freak accident. As the surgeons fought to save his arm, he had a profound near-death experience, and later he realized he had acquired astonishing new abilities. The first, an ability to create dramatic paintings of what he'd seen in the afterlife. The second, the ability to compose classical music, despite being unable to read or write any musical notation. His debut symphony premiered at a sellout orchestral concert to a standing ovation. He has since composed further classical works, also premiered at sellout performances, and continues to paint and compose in Cambridge, England. His book, Shine On, which tells his remarkable story, is out with a foreword by Raymond Moody, who writes, David Ditchfield's Shine On is one of the most gripping accounts of a near-death experience that I have read. David, all the way from Cambridge, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you. Hi, Lee, and thanks for that lovely introduction. It's brilliant.
Well, it's such a remarkable thing that you went through, but start us at the beginning. I believe you told me you grew up in a family that attended the Church of England, and by the age of 10 or 11, you'd lost interest in attending Sunday services. Tell us a little about how people reacted to your dyslexia and what effect that had on you.
Yeah, well, I wasn't really diagnosed at the time, and it wasn't taken very seriously, dyslexia. Or now, the people who've got learning difficulties are guided through school and helped and encouraged. But that wasn't the case for me. And we had this system in our schools where we'd have bad reports and good reports, and the good reports would go out to the guys who tried really hard and achieved. And the bad reports were just really condemning. They were literally written on red paper. So I had many of those. And I know, and they didn't hold back, in their comments. They were really scathing, quite personal as well. And this was intended to go back to my parents and for my parents to sort of be in complete shock, thinking, wow, I didn't realize this is what you were like at school, and I was trying to explain myself, saying, look, I actually want to learn. I want to achieve. I'm not that person that they're writing about, And but the thing is, it's just like what's struck me more recently is how important those things are, how irresponsible it is of the system to be set up like that, because it stays with you. It's your template for life, basically, not just in terms of job prospects, but in terms of your character. That's how you feel. I went through years of feeling like a failure and embarrassed about myself.
Well, not too long before your spectacular train accident, which I'll have you describe in a minute, life wasn't going for you so well, but a friend suggested that you attend a public meeting with a psychic. Tell us what she said there.
Yeah, well, it was by chance. I'd got no interest in anything like that at all, actually, other than I was on a train traveling up to see my sister and her family, and there was a lady sat opposite me asking directions for the next station or what have you. And she said, look, we're going to stay medium tonight. And I said, okay. And I wasn't really interested. I was actually quite hungover. I remember that day. And I just thought, I don't want to listen to this, you know. But she was insistent on giving me like this little flyer. So I put it in my pocket. And I got this flyer out when I arrived at my sister, because there was a lot of mayhem going on with the kids and stuff, you know. And I just thought, I'm going to go. I'm going to give it a go and just try it out. And I got to, it was a small spiritualist church in the town, and it's called St. Ives. And it was just a doorway, basically, you know, an unassuming doorway. And I walked through there and it was packed. There was a lot of people in there. So I shuffled my way to a seat and sat down. And this medium was great. She was very animated. She came out and she was like giving lots of messages to people who'd come there to connect with their loved ones who'd passed. And, you know, they were all messages about that, really. And then she suddenly turned around. I felt like the atmosphere shifted, and she looked at me and she said, "Gentleman in the blue sweater, your life is about to change." And I was going, "Really?" I said, "Well, in what way?" And she walked around and she was going, yes, I know. She was like talking to them. And she said, "They're not telling me, but they just said, be prepared because it's going to be big." So I thought, you know, it's going to be a lottery winning and all, you know, the kind of things you'd expect, you know, but of course that wasn't to be. The big change that they were talking about was the huge accident I was about to have and the huge life event that would turn everything around for me.
Yes. You said, I think in your book, she said this in a different kind of voice entirely. Strange, powerful.
Yeah.
Made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end.
It was totally different. Yeah, it was. It just seems kind of like it was almost like, you know, the focus had gone off the whole evening of, you know, bringing joy to people, saying, "I'm connected with your grandfather," or what have you, and, you know, a gold watch and things like that. You know, it was all very much like that. Whereas it seemed very profound, a very sort of like, and she seemed like she'd gone into almost like a trance mode. And she was like, as I say, she was connecting and talking with these voices coming into her mind. And yeah, so it was something I'll never forget.
And when you asked about it, I think she said you are being cared for, led, embraced, and carried more than you can possibly know.
That's right, she did, yeah. And I didn't really get that at the time, because my life was in a bad, as you introduced, you know, I was drinking heavily. I was running out of money. I was running out of work. You know, I was living in London and I was picking up mainly blue collar work, you know, casual laboring, working on construction sites, washing up in kitchens, in restaurants, you know, and all that was coming. I was running out of luck. So, and I was about to lose my apartment. I was about to lose everything.
Wow.
So I couldn't really connect with that. My mind would not say, yes, I am being protected. That's great. Because I was non-spiritual, you know, I didn't really think about the church, Christianity, faith, none of those things. I wish I had, because it would have helped me through a lot better at that point.
Well, we come to the train station, and you were seeing your friend Anna off on the train, and describe what happened.
Yeah, well, she'd come to visit. I'd stayed for a few weeks at my sister's with the family, and she'd come up from London, and she had to get back. So I was helping her onto the car with her bags and everything, and you know, we were saying goodbye, and I gave her a hug and a kiss, and then it was at that point, the bottom, I was wearing like a sheepskin coat, like 3/4 length coat, and the bottom corner got trapped in the automatic closing doors, and I couldn't pull it free. You know, and I remember just like hearing the engines rev, and I just looked into Anna's eyes through the glass, you know, and I could see sheer terror as she looked back, and I just figured at this point that this was it. I thought I'm going to die. I'm not going to survive.
Wow.
Anyhow, the train started to pull out the station, and it went at great speed. You know, I felt every gear change, every gear shift, and I eventually lost my footing and was dragged along the platform edge, and then I was pulled between the space of the platform edge and the speeding train, and I went under. I was sucked under. It was like being sort of pulled into a very dark and violent machine. You know, I felt the mechanics, I felt all that metal, I felt the heaviness of it all because I was like fully conscious. But I remember going into fight or flight mode, and I decided to fight. You know, I decided that I wasn't going to let this thing beat me. It's almost like the train suddenly morphed into like this huge mechanical beast. It was no longer a train. And I thought, you're not going to take me. You're not going to beat me. And I was thrown around. It's like tossed around like a rag doll, basically. And then I ended up being thrown down in between the tracks. And I was laid in between the track, and the train was still going on. It was a very long train. Then eventually it went down. And I remember just lying there, and I couldn't believe I'd survived that. I couldn't believe I was alive. Yeah.
They shut down the whole system, didn't they? They didn't want any more trains to come by.
That's right, yeah. Because there was no guard on the platform, but there was somebody in like a little office with, you know, with cameras watching the trains pull out, and she was in charge of signaling, and so she shut down the whole system, which I didn't know that. I wish I'd known it, because as I had laid there, all I could think was, you know, there's another train going to come, you know, it's not all over yet. And so, yeah, but the paramedics arrived really quick. You know, there was a small hospital nearby. So they arrived, they jumped down onto the track, and they cut through my clothing, and they somehow got me onto a stretcher and into an ambulance. It's a long drop, you know, it really is. When you're down there, you don't realize how far down. And so, yeah, they got me in an ambulance. I remember the doctor turning around to me and saying, look, you know, there's a hospital around the corner, but the one that's really going to save you is a 25-minute drive. Can you hang on? I said, yeah, let's go. So we just sped off down the highway, you know, with the sirens blasting out. That moment that we all dread, that, you know, whenever we hear an ambulance go by, I always think, well, I hope that's not going to be me one day. And there it was me. And we arrived at the hospital, and I remember there was a whole team of medics and people waiting for me there. You know, they'd been alerted from the station, and they got to work on me straight away. There was a lot of anxiety in their voices, you know, and confusion. I didn't know what was going on, because it was all science to me, and I didn't know what they were talking about. So I was scared, you know. I thought, it's not all over yet, you know. This I'm not sure that I'm going to survive this, because I was losing a lot of blood by this point. You know, I remember it being all over the floor. I remember my left arm had been cut, you know, from the elbow down, and so there was lots of blood loss from there.
Yes, he said you could look right into the bone, I think, in your book.
That's right. That's when I was lying. That's the first thing I did, because when I was lying on the track, you know, just like as we all do, you know, even if you just have a fall on the footpath, the pavements, you know, the sidewalk, you know, you look, see what's happened. You know, there I was looking at the whole of my arm completely exposed. It had been ripped open, and I could see every single nerve ending, every single sort of muscle. And I remember going, wow, that's me. That's the inside of me, the inside of my body. It was quite a profound moment to see all that, you know.
Yeah. Anyhow,
so there we are. So my family arrived at the hospital, which was a real shock, you know, because the actual consultant, the surgeon who was in charge of everything, he was a really lovely guy. He said, look, your family are here. Would you like to see them? I said, yeah, of course, you know, send them through, please. And so they came in, and my mother was in tears, and my father was just in complete shock. And I remember, there you go, you see, those feelings of shame and guilt as a child came rushing back into my mind, and I was apologizing to my mom. I said, Mom, I'm sorry, it was me bringing dramas to this family, you know. And she said, no, it's not your fault. Stop it. You know, of course, it wasn't my fault, but it just goes to show you that's the place I was in my mindset. And then Anna was sat right at the back of the room, and I just was so pleased to see her, because we'd just been through something so profound together, you know, that there was an instant bond and connection. And I could see that she looked completely shattered. I said, look, I need to speak to Anna, please, you know. So she came over, and I remember she just looked at me and she said, I can't believe you're alive. I thought you were dead. they announced, over the system that there'd been a fatality and that you were dead. So anyhow, so it was at that point that I left all the drama of the hospital, all the pain that I was in, and I left and I found myself in another realm altogether.
Yes, I think you said it was like complete surrender, as though you'd let go of the side of a sinking boat and slip beneath the surface of the waves.
Yes, it was. It was. It's not like I wanted to die, but after everything I'd been through in my life at that point, and after the horror of that accident, it was kind of like I accepted what was happening. I accepted that where I was going, because I didn't know what was happening. Obviously, I knew nothing about near-death experiences at this point. I'd never heard of them,
Right.
And I did actually figure that I hadn't survived. I thought, this is it. I'm dead. I've moved on to whatever awaits us all. And yeah.
So what did you see at first?
Well, at first, I figured I was actually in a darkened room. I thought I was in a dark space, because there wasn't a lot of light around. But I saw these orbs of colors that were almost greeting me, that were slowly pulsating all around me. Beautiful colors, oranges, ambers, greens, and reds, And as these colors pulsated, I started to feel relaxed and safe in this space, even though I didn't know where I was. And I tried to get my bearings, and I looked down and I realized that I was no longer laid on the hospital trolley, but I was on a huge rock. It was like a big slate. I describe it as being like a medieval altar, just for want of comparison.
Yeah.
And the strange thing was, it was actually very comfortable to lay on. Normally you wouldn't. And I realized I was no longer clothed. I was just covered in this blue sheet that was like a satin sort of silky material, which I felt comfortable in. I know, not comfortable. It felt comforting to have this kind of sheet laid over me.
Yes.
Yeah. So I laid back and I just closed my eyes and just kind of allowed myself to go with that moment. And it's almost like through my eyelids, I noticed that there was light coming through. And so I opened my eyes. And as I looked up, I gazed up and I saw the 3 grids of light, like symmetrical grids, closing in on me above my face, above my head and my body. And as I looked into this light, I realized that this light was so intense and so bright and white that I thought, how come I can look into it? Normally it'd be too bright to be able to gaze into, but I just couldn't take my gaze away, because I realized it was more than just light. It was like a healing force, a healing energy that was just healing all the trauma that my body had just been through, that whole horrific accident. So I laid back and closed my eyes and bathed in this light, because I felt that the energy coming from it was actually really something quite like nothing I'd ever felt before. It was like a vibration, Then I felt the presence of somebody, like somebody had entered the room or the scene, if you like. So I opened my eyes again and lifted my head, and just in front of me, there was an androgynous person stood at my feet, wearing a very simple contemporary black t-shirt, nothing too ethereal, with this kind of bright sort of white blonde hair and this skin that was glowing light from within. And the energy and the light that was coming from this person was just so beautiful. And I knew this person, but I couldn't place it where from, I said out loud, I said, I know your face. I know you, don't I? Where do I know you from? And this person refused to answer and just smiled at me with a knowing smile. But I knew instantly that I was being guarded by this being of light, that this person was protecting me. And I figured that I'd known he or she throughout the whole of my life and beyond. There was that instant bond there. So
did this person say anything to you?
No, this person said nothing. It was just the smile that said it all, which was, you're okay, you are safe, And I laid my head back, and as I closed my eyes, and I felt this energy of this that was coming from the light that would suddenly become more intense. And then I felt the presence of more people. And either side of me, there were two female forms with their hands hovering slowly over my body. The girl to my right was very European looking, with long hair and just a simple brown dress again. Whereas the girl to my left was more American Indian or Asian Indian or maybe Brazilian in appearance. And she had a more traditional dress on. But the energy that was coming from their hands was a lot more intense than the light that was coming from the three grids. And I felt like they were going from beyond just healing the physical wounds. I felt like they were healing all the emotional wounds that I carried with me throughout my whole life, that we all do. You know, baggage, we call it, don't we? When people say, oh, yeah, that person's carrying a lot of baggage. I certainly was. But I felt like all those layers of baggage were being slowly taken off me piece by piece. And they were just getting down to the pure essence of my soul, you know, and I'd never felt like that before in my life. And it was just a beautiful feeling to you know, experience all this unconditional love that was getting right down to the essence of me.
And without a word being spoken, huh?
Well, there was no words spoken, but I was getting sort of telepathy, if you like, that was telling me what was going on. So I knew that all three of these people that were there had been with me the whole of my life. You know, we all talk about having guardian angels. These were my guardian angels, and they'd been there throughout all those years of distress and hardship. But I'd never let them in. I'd never even listened. Even when I was told by a medium that I was being cared for and I was being looked after, I just couldn't acknowledge it then. So at this point, I realized that they had been there throughout. And I also realized that the being of light stood at my feet was actually my higher self, you know, my true guardian angel, my keeper, you know, the guardian to my soul. That's why I knew that I'd known that person throughout all my life. And as I say, beyond, you know. So, yeah, it was a strong bond. It was a strong connection. And it was all unconditional love that was coming from them.
Wow. Was there anything else that they told you? Did they tell you anything about your future?
No, nothing was said about my future, because what was really apparent to me was that that there was no sense of past or future. Mm-hmm. And that was what was so liberating for me, because I'd spent so many years, especially up until that point, worrying about the past, worrying about past mistakes or opportunities that I'd missed. Or I was worrying about the future because I was broke, where my life was going to go. What was I going to do with myself? How was I going to survive? All those things. Whereas all of a sudden, it didn't matter anymore. Time did not exist. The past was not important to me anymore. It was just a story. And so was the future. The future wasn't of any concern to me. So really, it was all about being in the present moment, being in the essence of my pure, authentic self.
And I guess you looked at your badly injured arm, and it seemed to be healed.
That's right. Yeah.
On the other side, although they were still working on it in the hospital.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the first things I did actually was to check my body, and I noticed that everything was intact as I lay under this blue sheet, you know, and I just had my arms out over the top of the sheet, and which I painted later on, and yes, everything was there, but I still believe, that even though my soul was now passed on to the next realm, it still was in shock. It had been, I'd been shattered basically from a really, really frightening and terrifying accident, and I believe that my the body and the soul still needed nurturing, and I still needed to get grounded, if you like. So,
you think those were all your thoughts, or were they interjecting their thoughts along with yours?
Well, yeah, I was most certainly being educated, because, as I say before, I was completely non-spiritual, and I wouldn't have even been able to piece any of this together in my mindset, the way I'd lived my whole life was any adversity, I just skipped the surface. I'd say, all right, I'm not dealing with that. I'm going to go to the nearest bar and have a drink with my friends or what have you. So all of a sudden I was being sort of given like a sort of an education about the fact that actually I am really loved, and I'm okay. I'm not this bad person that I believed that I was, that I'd been taught by society that I was, because I'd never fitted in and all those things, So yeah, suddenly I was being able to intellectualize, if you like, everything that was happening to me. So I was being helped to be able to piece all that knowledge together.
Did it make you want to stay there?
Yeah, I was more than happy to stay there. I mean, it's because the experience evolved from that point. Because I remember as I lay there, I started thinking about my family in the hospital, because obviously, as I pointed out earlier, they were very distressed and upset. And I thought, well, I'm clearly dead now, so they're going to be really distressed. So I thought I better go and check on them. So I tried to edge myself over the side of this huge rock, looking down, hoping to see them. And I looked down and I couldn't see them. I didn't see them at all. But what I did see was this most beautiful sight. It was an awesome waterfall of stars. It was huge. It was like the size of Victoria Falls, Niagara Falls. But instead of millions of tons of water cascading over the edge, there were billions of sparkling stars cascading over, and shooting stars just flying through and down. And as I looked down, I tried to fix my gaze, and the further I looked, I realized I was looking in from one galaxy into another. And then I would start to see colors and nebulas and beautiful formations that I'd never seen before. To me, the universe was just that piece of black sky that I really looked up at with sparkling white stars. But no, these were beautiful colors that I was looking at. And I just knew at that point that obviously I was not in a small, darkened space at all. I was in the universe itself. And that was like a really profound moment, because I realized that I was actually part of the universe, that I was actually, my energy was going with that forward movement of the universe. And that was really amazing. And I remember just pulling myself back over after looking at this awesome sight and thinking, okay, well, I can't see my family now, but they will get through this. And eventually they will be coming to experience all the wonders that I'm experiencing here themselves. And maybe I'll get to see them here. Who knows? But I'd got this kind of sense of positivity about it all. There was no sense of guilt or worry or shame like I was feeling back in the hospital. I was okay about it. I just thought they'll be fine. They will get through it, So, yeah.
I find it so interesting that there you're looking to see your family. You're thinking about some other people that you love, and which means connection. And then suddenly you realize you're connected with the entire universe.
Exactly. Yeah.
You look for your family and you see the entire universe.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. And it was all this was the next big lesson, that and it's something that I still feel very strongly, that I'd never thought about that before, that we are all part of the universe, that we're all connected with it. We've kind of forgotten that, because mankind has just like developed so much, that we just, technology is brilliant. I love it, but we've forgotten how we actually ruled by Mother Nature, but by, the laws of the universe, if you like. And we're all part of that energy that's moving forward. And even though, the world is in turmoil at the moment, and there's a lot happening that we're all very frightened of, I do believe, that the universe is behind us. That the universe wants us to keep creating, because that's what the universe does. That the rest of nature, the law, they all follow the laws of the universe. When you think about the changes of seasons, how animals and birds follow that by when they nest and, and they produce, and all these different things. We've forgotten that we do that. So it was a moment of realization that, yes, we are part of that universe as well. You know, we have to remember that, I think.
When you looked at the universe, did you continue to have that feeling of love?
Yeah.
Was it flowing out of or from you into that connection?
Well, I mean, basically, as I say, for the first time in my life, I had got in touch with the authentic me, you know, and once you do that, and once you let go of all the labels that are tagged onto you, the identity that you give yourself, once you lose that identity, you get in touch with unconditional love. And it's a very high source that's there for us all to tap into. And so I was feeling that essence of pure love coming from the three guides that were giving me the healing. And but it was to become more profound. But at the end of the actual experience itself, that energy of unconditional love was to be given to me in a really incredible and profound way. And I actually felt it before I saw it. I was again laid out, and I felt this energy of love had turned up like a huge dial, and it was like every single molecule of my body was vibrating with this unconditional love. And I thought, what has happened? And I lifted my head, and just beyond the androgynous being that was stood there, I saw a huge tunnel of white light coming through the universe, and it was coming towards me. And this was even huger than looking at this waterfall of stars. And there was dramatic flames that were like rolling around the perimeter, around the edge of this white light. Again, normally that would be quite frightening and quite sort of like, because you wouldn't know what's going on. But for me, I just felt the excitement of it all and the joy. And I felt this energy of love coming from this white light. And then I was being told the telepathy was then telling me that this, what I'm looking at and feeling now, this is the source of all creation. This is where it all comes from. You know, this is God. This is not the image of God that's normally in some kind of human form in all faiths, really. You know, no, this was it. It was coming from this pure white light in this huge tunnel with these very powerful flames that were slowly turning around. And I remember actually laughing, you know, with joy at that point. And it was then that I came crashing back into my body. I was back in the hospital, you know, I was back into the drama of the hospital. The lights then were suddenly fluorescent strip that I couldn't even look at, you know, and the noise was just overkill. And the pain was immense.
As you described that tunnel in your book, I had this thought of the cornucopia out of which everything pours. It's it's like a mythological tunnel. Basically, it's a almost like a conch shell or something that funnels out all of the universe out of that creative light that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And I think you said flaming hues of orange and red and gold, slowly erupting, flaring and weaving. Amazing.
Well, this is it. And, and now, I mean, ever since my NDE, I've always been fascinated and still am by watching any programs all about space travel, astronauts. I like to hear their take on it, how when they go out to space and they're traveling out in the universe and stuff. And there's been some really profound, reactions to these men who are scientists. They're the scientists of all scientists to be able to do that job, And it's really wonderful to hear that, but also seeing all these beautiful new images that we're getting from these telescopes, from the Hubble telescope and the new one that's just come out, and it's fascinating because some of those images that are coming out are very similar to what I saw, and there's been some moments of affirmation for me because I painted what I'd seen, the tunnel of white light and the colors that were coming from it. And they're very similar to images that the Hubble telescope had taken of the far edges of our galaxy. So I remember some friends phoning me up and saying, have you got the news on? Have you seen these images on the news? I said, no. I said, switch it on. It's your painting, which is really lovely. It was really lovely to sense that. Yeah.
It is. Now, when you were confronting this tunnel opening with the flames around it, did you take it as an invitation to enter the tunnel? I mean, was this your choice as to whether to go on from there or to come back?
I didn't actually think about that at all. Because I do know, obviously, now that a lot of people who have near-death experiences do actually enter that tunnel. So the tunnel of white light figures a lot in most NDEs. But for me, as I say, I knew nothing about NDEs at that point in my life. And so it wasn't something that I thought, should I be entering it or not? And I wasn't given the choice, because it was pretty much at that point that I'd had this profound moment of knowledge that this is the source of all creation and this was the source of love, that I was sent back. And it's interesting because when I did come back, a lot of people say to me, oh, you must have been really disappointed. And yes, part of me was, but I felt like I was still attached to that realm with an umbilical cord that was just still, so I felt excited still. And all I could say to myself was, why have they sent me back? What's my mission? What have I got to do? I remember throughout, the weeks in hospital, lying in that bed, I could hardly move, but all I could think about was, what is my mission? What do they want me to do? I must have come back for a reason,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Was your family there when you came back? Was Anna there?
Yes, they were there actually. Yeah. And because I remember they were just about to take me into a theatre to operate on me, and so yeah, and I was, as I say, I was full of excitement, and I remember I said to Anna, who was stood near me, I said, Anna, I've got something to tell you. And she said, not now, just tell me later. I said, no, this is really important. You've got to hear about this now, And she put her hand over my mouth very, very softly and said, you can tell me later. And I thought, okay. So and we did talk about it. She was one of the first people that I told. I told her and I told my sister. It took me a week to tell my parents about it because the fact that they're Christian, I thought this is probably, not going to, it might not gel with all their teachings, from their church. And I wanted them to understand it and get it and to believe it,
What was Hannah's reaction? I mean, you had this eye-to-eye contact with her when you both realized that you were trapped and were probably going to be dragged to your death by the train.
Well, yeah, we spoke a lot. She was living in London and I was in Cambridge in hospital there. So, it's about 100 miles apart, but we kept a lot of contact by phone. And I knew that she just said, she really couldn't stop thinking about it and thinking about what had happened and thinking about me. And so our bond, we'd hardly known each other that long, but suddenly we were very, very, we knew each other very well because what had happened. I think that would happen with anybody, with two people who had just been through something. Even a complete stranger, you'd feel that sense of but for her, it was just it was terrifying because she ran through the carriage through the car of the train, as it pulled out the station and looked through the window. And she told me, she said, I know this is going to sound strange, David, but when you went under the train, you went under so gracefully. And I said, I know I did. And she said, why is that then? I said, because it's not like time slowed down, but it's like because I went into fight or flight mode. It's really bizarre, but I remember thinking, even though the whole thing only took seconds, I thought I'd seen a news flash a couple of weeks previous where a small infant had been thrown from a burning apartment block and had landed without any injuries. And they said that's because infants don't tense up like we do as adults. So I relaxed my body and I went under. And I was obviously, I realized I was told later because I went back to the spiritualist church and there was a lot of mediums would be there and picking up a lot about me because this energy was still coming out of me. And one of them said, the day you had your accident, you had a very strong power animal that was there. And I was going, wow, that's remarkable. That's great. I'd never heard of that before. And she said, yeah, that's what saved you. Yeah. That's what cradled you and relaxed you to go through and survive that. Because the British Rail Police spent a whole year doing their inquiries. You know, they pulled the car doors right down to the last rivet, you know. And when they finished all their stuff, you know, they said, well, we're finished now, David. And I said, okay. And I remember he turned around, the head of the police, and he said, look, we were all banging our heads together still. You should be dead. We did all our measurements. You should not have survived that. We don't get it.
Anna did something else too. She got the people on the train to pray for you.
That's right, yeah. Because she couldn't get the train to stop, and she couldn't, you know, so there was all these notices over the door saying, if you pull this, you'll get £100 fine. Don't pull this, don't pull that. And obviously, if you're in shock, you just don't know what to do. So she said she ran through the train looking for a guard, you know, and she came across a guy who was collecting tickets. And so she grabbed him and he said, I'll tell the driver. So the train just stopped in the middle of the countryside. And she said they were just sat on this train. And so she figured I hadn't survived it, you know, because she saw me go under it as it pulled out at great speed. And so she turned around and said, I'd like to say a prayer for my friend who's just gone under the train because, you know, and I don't think he survived it. And she said, a woman stepped forward and said, look, I'm Christian. Would you like me to take the prayers? She said, that'd be great. And she said, it was amazing. She said, everyone just laid down their laptops and iPads and newspapers because they're all commuters. Yeah. And everyone prayed. And I said, do you know what, Anna? I felt the power of those prayers. I felt it, and I did. And I also know that from my parents that various churches in all the villages around, because it was in all over the news at the time, were praying for me. And I felt the power of those prayers. And I really believe now that if people say, can you say some prayers for somebody who I love, I'll say, yeah. And I pray because I do believe in the power of prayer. It really does work.
Yes. Well, you asked a friend to bring you something to draw with, pad and
that's right, yeah.
pencil.
Yeah.
Tell us about what motivated you to do that.
It was actually fear that I was going to forget everything that had happened because it was so profound, and I just thought this everyone's got to know about this, and so I thought the best thing I can do to record it is to actually do a drawing. And I thought, no, it's got to be a painting. I thought it's got to be like those huge Renaissance paintings that you see, you know, in the Vatican, you know, those biblical scenes. It's got to be like that. And I'd done nothing like this before, but I didn't care. So I remember the nurses propped me up and I got this little sketch pad, and I've still got it. And they're very, very faint sketches for my very first painting that I did. And as time went on, I started to get more strength. I started asking some of the nurses if I could sketch them, to use them, you know, and so I used them in the painting, you know, because obviously you need people to be able to sit for you, and so they featured, which was lovely to be able to incorporate them in the very first painting that I did, which is all about what I'd seen there in the afterlife. But it didn't stop, because once I started doing that painting, obviously I was apprehensive at first because I thought, I've got to pull this off, you know, I can't mess it up. But once I started painting, I was amazed at how well it was all coming together. And I knew that I was being helped. I knew that I was still attached, as I say, with this umbilical cord to the other realm, and the energy was still coming through. And somebody was giving me a crash course on how to create skin tones with color, how to apply paint and to be brave and to do all these different things to create the very first painting that I did. And so that's how it all started. And then I couldn't stop. I was prolific. I kept painting more and more from that moment on. Yeah.
In the book, you say the Renaissance painters got it so wrong when they painted the Creator as a bearded man poised in the sky. They should have painted the light instead.
Indeed, yeah.
Where all things return. And then it says, this is the source of all love. This is life itself.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I believe. And so that's what I've been painting since. Those are my images of what I've seen.
Well, the one you did of the flames around the tunnel, the very dramatic, beautiful painting, you told me is on its way to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C.
That's right, yeah. It's not just the actual tunnel itself. It's the one with the tunnel, and then also with the being of light with the black T-shirt.
Yes.
So it's that one there. And that's, yeah. So I was contacted by the Museum of the Bible, and they said that they'd seen all my interviews and they'd seen my paintings. And they said, we'd like to loan that particular painting for an exhibition that's going to be there on loan for a year next year. So I'm really excited about that. Not just because it's going to be out there, and people seeing it and in Washington, D.C., but I'm excited about the fact that the Museum of the Bible are looking, into near-death experiences and hearing people's stories and want to actually do an exhibit on it and talking about that aspect. So that's really exciting. That's great.
When IANDS has their conference next Labor Day, it's very close. It's in Virginia, very close to Washington, D.C.
Brilliant.
And so I plan to make a trip into Washington to take a look.
Great.
I'd like to ask you, too, your painting called My Realization of Christ. Tell us about what inspired that.
Okay, so that came because, as I say, I'd gone back to that spiritualist church where I'd met the medium because I wanted to see if they could help piece together what happened, and they did. They knew straight away. They said you had a near-death experience, and when I was there, I was looking pretty banged up. I got all bits of plastic holding my arm together, and they said, "Look, we do spiritual healing. We don't normally invite people. That's for you to make the choice. But if you'd like to come along," I said, "Yes, definitely. I'd love to. It sounds great." So I started having spiritual healing. So yeah, it all came because some of the healers are clairvoyant and would give very short messages at the end of the healing session. Normally simple things like, I could see a blue light that was coming through into your heart chakra or what have you. But there was one healing session when I was there, I'd laid out on this bed and I was being healed by two healers. And I saw an image of Christ floating above me. And I thought, wow, Christ is with me. And it was really wonderful. But what was great was whenever we finished, we always sit there in silence for a while. Nobody talks. And we just kind of just gathering our thoughts. And then one of the clairvoyant healers said, "David, I just want to let you know that Christ was with you when I was healing you. That was a very special moment." And I said, "No, I saw him as well." So, of course, I had to go home and paint him. So that was my realization of Christ. So I wanted to paint him as I'd seen him floating above my body, looking really healthy and beautiful, And but I also wanted to paint an image because most images of Christ are at his worst possible point, where he's on a cross. I mean, there's obvious reasons for that, I know, but I want to try to get away from that as well. I want to paint this image of life and love that I saw, that he was just really healthy, and the energy that was coming from him was just one of kindness and joy and love. So that's how I painted him. Yeah.
So this is the resurrected Christ looking down on the world.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the best way to put it, Lee. It is. It's like the resurrection, because that's how he's seen, isn't he? In the resurrection, he's just wearing like a white cloth, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not very up on the Bible itself. My dyslexia. I tried to read the Bible after my NDE because I wanted to try and see what was going on, but it's very difficult for me to try and grasp things, unfortunately. So hopefully when I go over to the Museum of the Bible, I'll be able to learn a lot more from that museum, which I'm looking forward to because it's very visual by the looks of it.
Since you're so interested in the visual, the Shroud of Turin would be a really interesting artifact, I would think, for you. And I believe they're going to have an exhibit of a replica of the Shroud of Turin at the Museum of the Bible.
That's right. Yeah, I think from what my emails with them, I think that might be happening now. Yeah, they said that was going to be the one that's before mine. And
it would be nice if they were there together.
It would be great, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's hope so.
But check out the image that was left on the burial cloth in the tomb when Jesus was resurrected. The cloth was left behind, and there's a whole history connected with the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
In the little bit of time we've got left, David, I'd like you to tell how you got into composing music.
Well, that came along again. I was indicated by one of the healers at the spiritual healing. They kept saying, one of them would say, why am I singing a violin laid across your chest while I'm healing you? I said, I have no idea. Then another one would say, I hear Beethoven and Wagner. And I said, okay. Then one of them said, they're telling me that you're going to go and write a piece of music about your experience. So I said, right. So as soon as I got that message, I went back to my apartment, and all I got was an old cheap synthesizer, and I just got that out, and I got it all, and I got no computer at that point. All I got was like a little cassette recorder, and I started writing what I thought was going to be a song, but that wasn't coming. Nothing was happening. Then one day I was watching an old movie on the TV, and I just sat there with this synthesizer, and also this chord progression just happened with my right hand. And I thought, wow, that sounds really beautiful. Quick, record it, and I recorded it with the TV on in the background still, but, and then I went and made some coffee, came back and thought, no, this is something special. And I just started developing it. And I thought, this needs to be performed by an orchestra. This is not a 3-minute song. So I kept with the same sense of sort of, no barriers. I just got on with it. And I'd met a cello player who was interested in my work, and she was very spiritual. And she said, what are you up to? We were having coffee one day. And I said, look, I've just written this piece of music. And I told her all about it. She said, well, maybe the orchestra I play with could perform it. And I said, well, that would be great. So my brother kind of stepped in and said, look, you need some software. I'm going to give you an old laptop and some software. And when you play your keyboard, it'll sort of transform that into notation, because the orchestra needs music. They can't just have a cassette with like, here it is, play it, So that's what happened. And I just worked and worked around the clock 24/7. And then I met with the orchestra and I took the score in, and I can't read or write music, so I didn't even know what was on there. And I said, but here it is. What do you think? And they said, yeah, we'll do it. So they agreed to do it. And it was amazing, because I was being helped in the same way as the paintings to create this piece of music. But not only that, I was also being helped by bringing the whole thing alive, because they said to me, look, we normally get composers to say a few words to the local press. Would you do that? I said, yeah, of course. So I spoke to the local press, and they said, hang on, you're the guy who went under the train, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And they said, this is going on the front cover. And then the phone kept ringing. Then the BBC said, we want to come to the rehearsal and interview you and film the orchestra. So I said, great. So because of that, the concert sold out 2 weeks in advance. And so the whole place was just packed. And for me, there was no sense of ego involved in all this. It wasn't like, yeah, I'm the great I am. It was more like, brilliant. The atmosphere is going to be really amazing, and people are going to be able to experience what I experienced through the music, hopefully. And they certainly did. It's I couldn't believe how beautiful it sounded. Again, just like looking at those paintings, it wasn't like listening to something that I created on my own. This was like coming through from the universe, and there was like there it was being performed, and it was like a 3-dimensional sound that just filled the whole place. And there was a standing ovation, and I was sat with my family. My mum was in tears again, but this time it was tears of joy, So yeah, wow. It was amazing.
Well, your website has a sample of that 3 parts of that concert.
That's right. Yeah, there's 3 movements. It's called the Divine Light, and so there's 3 movements to it. Yeah. And
you've been going ahead with that, writing other music as well?
Yeah, I didn't stop from then. I got commissioned pretty much soon afterwards by different orchestras, and so I've been writing since, and I'm writing a new piece now. And so the plan is to be releasing some music that people can download, because up till now I've been the actual symphony, you can listen to that for free, which is great by me, on my website. But people have been saying, I want to be able to listen to this in my car when I'm driving and stuff. So there's going to be a whole group of new pieces that I'm putting together, which is using classical musicians, but also synthetic sounds as well, synthesizers and I'm really excited about it. It feels really good.
Yeah, well, you should. I mean, it's amazing. Tell folks how they can find your website where they can hear the music and also see your paintings.
Yeah, sure. If you go to, it's called Shine On the Story, because my book, which I didn't actually talk about, a book came out a couple of years ago, which just tells the whole story. And I think you introduced it. Sorry, didn't you, Lee? My apologies.
I did, but I was going to ask you about that right after this.
Yeah, so that's why the website is called shineonthestory.com. Or you can try davidditchfield.com. Either way, it will take you to my website. And when you get to the website, you can see links to my social media if you're interested in following me to get updates on what I'm doing, Instagram. And also there's a YouTube channel where you can watch YouTube videos that I've made. So shineonthestory.com.
Of course, people are going to wonder, being dyslexic, how you wrote a book. And in fact, you had someone help you with that, but they seem to be reading your mind.
That's right. Yeah.
Tell us a little about that.
Yeah. Well, it's something that I'd always wanted to do. It was to write my story, but I thought that's not going to happen with my dyslexia. I couldn't get past that sort of barrier, if you like. And then it was by chance a friend of mine got in touch. I hadn't seen for some time. She'd been living in the Highlands of Scotland. And she said, when are you going to write your story? And I said, I can't. I'm dyslexic. And so she said, well, how about, I co-write it? I said, brilliant. So that's how it worked. And so we did hours and hours of conversation and interviews. A lot of it was done online like we're doing now because she was living, hundreds of miles away from me. But she said to me afterwards, when she watched my videos on talking about channeling and how I channel energy through when I'm in my music and my art, she said, you know what? I know from what you're talking about, that's what I was doing when I was writing the book. I was channeling, and she knew nothing about it at that stage. And I said, yeah, you were, because it's like you got right inside my mind. I couldn't believe how close you got to the whole essence of the story and me. So that worked out great. So that made that book work, So we were both being helped to make that come together and reach a lot of people, which it has. It's been really well received, yes. Which is amazing. Yeah.
Well received even by Raymond Moody.
Yes.
That's a big step up for any book that is concerning NDEs. David, thank you so much for this interview. This has been fascinating. It'll first be aired the day after Christmas. And since this is a story about gifts, I thought how appropriate. It just fell that way that you're talking about gifts from the light.
Yeah.
And
brilliant.
Anyway, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. It's been great chatting with you. It really has. Yeah.
My thanks again to David Ditchfield for sharing the story of his NDE and the abilities he gained. If listeners would like to hear this show again, or any of our more than 480 archived ad-free NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or go to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can subscribe to and comment on the complete NDE Radio library. Be sure to check out our NDE Radio Facebook page. Just search NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app. And listen again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.